Let's get started and make sure we get everyone away on time. So yeah, thank you for joining us today. So my name is Chris Rogers. I'm one of the product marketing managers here at HYCU. I look after our hybrid cloud portfolio. So anything from Nutanix, VMware, file shares, kind of anything on-prem is my responsibility. So today we're talking about complete resilience with NC2 without complexity. So for anyone who doesn't know HYCU, or you're not familiar with who we are and what we do, we've been around for 9 or so, maybe even 10 years now. Globally recognized and trusted, right? So we've got the strategic alliances with obviously people like Nutanix and Dell, all the public cloud providers, and some other really good household names you'll see on the right hand side. Yeah, we've got some really big investors that are happy to invest in us, and we've got nearly 5,000 customers across 78 different countries as well. So you can be, rest assured your data is in good hands if you choose Haiku to protect your Nutanix environment. So let's dig into the NC2 piece a little bit more. So, you've chosen NC2 for simplicity, resilience, and scale, right? And that might be across a few different use cases that are kind of highlighted on the right-hand side of the slide here. So the first one here being disaster recovery. A lot of customers are going to be using an NC2 instance or an NC2 cluster on a hyperscaler, so AWS, GCP, Azure, or even OVHcloud, which is very popular in Europe. For that disaster recovery, so they don't have to have two data centers running. They can have an NC2 cluster running up there and use Nutanix replication or use Haiku to replicate the data up into there and recover if need be. Really good economics on that as well. You don't have to run a secondary data center with the, pooling, compute, and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of there on demand whenever you need it. The second use case a lot of customers are going to use it for is elastic capacity. So think of it like, end of year, or you've got a retail shop. So, November and December are going to be incredibly busy for you in terms of revenue and traffic to the website and the shop. You want to make sure you can expand out into, some extra capacity when you need to. So up your compute power, up your storage, up your everything else you need, but then also then drag that back down again when not needed. So you're not having to pay for compute and storage and all those other things you might need to run for the rest of the year, right? That elastic capacity is a great use case because you don't also then go and have to learn a new technology for 2 or 3 months a year, right? It's the exact same tooling, the exact same experience you'd expect from Nutanix across those different public clouds. And the last one we're seeing more and more become more and more popular is customers wanting to run multi-cloud environments, right? So they want to run across Azure, AWS, GCP, um, all at the same time, giving that multi-cloud resiliency, giving them scale across all those clouds, maybe different regions and different places as well. The one thing that is hard to do in that environment is you've got people have to learn three different environments, three different ways of working, three different ways of securing, protection, all those types of things. That's where NC2 really does come into its own because you're essentially running Nutanix on top of those public clouds, so giving you that unified experience across all of those. So you've chosen it, as I mentioned before, for that simplicity, that resilience, and that scale across those three different use cases. And I'm sure there's some use cases that I may have missed off there, but those are the ones we see typically at Haiku, those three. And the biggest thing that I see customers is that the protection then should not hold you back from that. You don't want to be in a position where you've chosen NC2, you've adopted it, and then your protection strategy then introduces complexity, time wasting, limited scale, those types of things. And this is where resilience and NC2 can create a bit of drag, right? So if you think about the biggest kind of problems that your organization is going to see when you're moving to NC2, these are the types of conversations we have all the time with customers, right? So the biggest one, the biggest bubble in our face right here is that different strategy than on-prem. So you're used to running that on-prem system, maybe you're using it for disaster recovery and you're using it for that elastic scale, or you've previously run Nutanix on-prem and you've now migrated into that multi-cloud across production system. What you don't want to have to do is then deploy a completely different strategy and a completely different way of working than how you did on premise, right? You don't want to have to deploy something natively in AWS, for instance, to be able to protect NC2 on AWS, right? You want to be able to deploy inside the Nutanix environment, just like you did inside of your Nutanix environment on-prem. And that's particularly pertinent when you think about that disaster recovery and that elastic scale. You don't want to have to then think about spinning up a brand new protection strategy or a brand new appliance or bit of software in something you're not really familiar with in AWS, right? You're really familiar with Nutanix. You don't want to have to learn AWS as well. That's the whole point of running NC2. So making sure that's, easier, cleaner, and risk-free. And then the one biggest one we also see is the babysitting, right? The something not quite built to run on Nutanix, especially then when you get and abstract that Nutanix onto a hyperscaler, onto a public cloud, that gap kind of gets bigger and bigger. You can't just port across what you used for VMware or Hyper-V into Nutanix and expect it to work across this vast array of workloads that you have now. So making sure that we don't have something that isn't quite fit for purpose. So that ends up being, manual jobs, so manual automations that could have been done, failed backups, loads of engineer hours that become wasted just by kind of looking after it and making it fit like a square peg in a round hole type of thing. It might fit if you hammer it hard enough, but realistically it's not the right fit. And then some of the other ones that you come round there, right? Protection grabs. So if you're running an NC2, you still want to be able to run things like NDB. You still want to be able to run things like volume groups and Nutanix files, all those other things that you're running on-prem today. Make sure you're choosing a solution that protects all of those things, even when they're running on NC2 as well. The biggest one for me, cyber resilience. I can't go into any customer, partner, prospect meeting without talking about cyber, without talking about ransomware. Making sure that we have something that allows us to continue with our cyber resiliency strategy. And I've got it here, like cyber resilience compromise, like not having to compromise on what we're able to do inside of our NC2 environment just because it is running on the cloud. So for instance, if you're running a backup hardware appliance, right, and everything's done on the hardware appliance, you can't really take that with you to NC2, right? Because you're going to have to you can't run that piece of hardware alongside your environment. So it becomes a little more difficult to do all those things you would do on the box. We don't have that issue, and we're going to run through some of the solutions to these problems in a little bit as well. Vendor lock-in, skills gap, and tool sprawl. All those things come up all the time, making sure we don't lock into particular vendors, especially for things like storage. Maybe you've got a storage vendor on premise you're using, like a data domain, wherever else it might be. Maybe you want to bring that data domain with you in a virtual edition in the cloud, or maybe you want to store it in the native public cloud storage because you're running in AWS. So HYCU has the ability to be flexible and let the customers decide where they put their data depending on the situation they find themselves in. And then my little checklist, the 5 things every NC2 customer deserves, right? And this is kind of boiled down from some of the issues we've seen, and then some of the things that we can kind of look for in how we decide what tooling we use to protect our NC2 environments. So, we can't afford to be down. That's kind of clear. That's why people often choose NC2, right? Because it's running on a hyperscaler, it's got that hyper availability. Maybe we come out to a hardware refresh and we want to make sure that we don't have to spend loads of money on CapEx. We can then use that on OpEx potentially. So get your entire NC2 environment back fast, clean, and complete. Right, that's what HYCU does. It does it for Nutanix on-prem. It does it in NC2 just as well as it does for the rest of the Nutanix stack. And that goes for everything that we have, right? So that is AHV virtual machines, volume groups, files, NDB, NKP, all the rest of the stack that goes with that. Complete resilience across all of that as well. And then don't pay the complexity tax. That's that's one of the biggest ones we do see is just because it works doesn't mean it works well, right? And that's kind of like the biggest thing that we come across and I come across in meetings when people say, what makes HYCU different? It's like, well, it just feels like it works better. It feels like it is meant to be with Nutanix and not been adapted from something else. So built from Nutanix from day one, as HYCU was, and built for every flavor on NC2 as well. So whether it's on AWS, Azure, GCP, or even on OVHcloud as well, which is, as I mentioned, very, very popular in Europe as well. We can deploy across all of those seamlessly and get you backed up, get you resilient from day one. And then cyber resilience, as I mentioned earlier, stop ransomware before it takes hold, catch it early, recover clean, and make sure you're recovering fast as well. And it's real resilience, so not just the recovery piece, is understanding the resilience layer as well. And the last two I like to kind of bundle together is your team doesn't get another headcount, right? So just because you've deployed on NC2, just because you're now in somewhere else, you don't get more people to look after that environment. In fact, potentially it's a reason that your headcount might have been slimmed or they've been reprioritized onto different things because you've not got hardware to look after. But suddenly if your backup provider or your resiliency provider is adding in extra complexity, what you thought you were gaining from headcount to repurpose on other projects, you're having to repurpose those back in to just look after the backups. So you've made your life simpler on one angle by adopting NC2, and then potentially made it more complicated by bringing something with you that doesn't work particularly well. And then the last piece is here, you shouldn't have to ask permission to run your own infrastructure. So there's zero lock-in from HYCU. There's no appliances. Deep integration into all cloud object storage across all the hyperscalers. So as I mentioned, wherever you can run NC2, you can also store HYCU data in the object storage inside of that cloud as well. So the data can follow exactly where you're going, and it can move across cloud or with those clouds with you as well. And then we come on to HYCU. So for us, it's the resilience platform that NC2 deserves. So protect and recover without disruption. We do have the deepest integration. We do have the widest coverage. We can recover anything anywhere, right? So just because you're running NC2, maybe you're running it in AWS, right? We could recover that VM into native Azure. We could bring it back down on-prem into Nutanix. We could move that to VMware. We could bring it to Hyper-V and vice versa. So all those workloads, or maybe you're in a public cloud today and you're adopting NC2 in the same public cloud, we can help you migrate those workloads into NC2 as well. So from native Azure, native AWS, we can put those straight into NC2 for you as well. Preserve that simplicity, a really, really, really big one. We can get up and running in less than an hour. I've had POCs complete literally within minutes, within 10, 15, 20 minutes, as long as the network ports were open and the permissions were there, download the installer, push it into HYCU, and we can have protection done in literal minutes, right? The way that HYCU was designed to look like Nutanix. It's designed to look like Prism. So when your administrators are used to using Nutanix, that's probably one of the major reasons you've chosen to use NC2, because it looks and feels like Nutanix, even though it's running on public cloud. You get the same tooling, the same experiences, but just running on someone else's cloud. When you now adapt that into what that can do in terms of protection, when you come into HYCU, it feels familiar. It feels like it's a Nutanix product. It feels like it was built for Nutanix and not adapted. And that security first resilience, that is key for all organizations, but especially if moving into the cloud for potentially the first time, right? So we pre-harden all of our appliances before they ship, the virtual appliances. There's nothing to patch afterwards. So you don't have to maintain the operating system underneath HYCU. Every backup is immutable by default. Point us to a target that supports immutability with it turned on, and we'll make sure every backup is made immutable for you. And that's going to help stop ransomware in its tracks as well. And we're going to go on to kind of a little bit more of detail about ransomware and kind of like the complete resilience for cyber resilience in a few more slides. And then we look at kind of like the deep integration and the complete coverage we do have. So the top two kind of go hand in hand together, right? We were purpose built for Nutanix those 9, 10 years ago, however long ago it was ago now. I like to kind of say we supported Nutanix before they got cool. Like, that band you saw in that little venue when there was 50 people watching. Now they're headlining Glastonbury or Coachella or whatever it might be. You're like, I was there at the start. I knew these guys before they were absolutely massive and Goliath, which is what they are today. But by virtue of that, Nutanix is in our DNA. Everyone inside of HYCU knows Nutanix. Everyone knows it inside out. All our support engineers, the customer success engineers, the account management teams, they all speak that Nutanix language, right? So when you're talking to them, they understand what you're talking about rather than trying to adapt a VMware concept or Hyper-V concepts to Nutanix, because it's just not quite the same. Coverage and flexibility across your Nutanix estate, right? Complete coverage and complete flexibility to run what you want, where you want it, and recover that wherever you want it as well. We have a committed joint roadmap with Nutanix, right? So we often have engineering meetings or product meetings with Nutanix to make sure that wherever they're going, we're going with them, right? So whether that's into AI and the rest of the world that they're going into, wherever they're kind of going, we're looking at making sure that the customers that they're taking on that journey, HYCU comes along with them. And that kind of means you future-proof your investment a little bit, right? So if you're choosing HYCU, you can kind of bet and kind of have that trust that HYCU is going to invest in Nutanix moving forward, and it's not just because Nutanix is the freshest, newest thing and the best thing since sliced bread in the last 5 years. It's because we're strategic with them. We want to move with them and want to take those customers on that journey that Nutanix has taken on. We want to be right beside them, right? Any NC2 use cases we discussed is supported across any of the cloud providers. And there's going to be less friction. There's going to be less time to deploy all of these things. So your kind of time to value is going to be absolutely minimal when it comes to HYCU. And this is then how we kind of then preserve that simplicity. So from setup, right, we deploy in, as I said before, we deploy minutes, pre-hardened, nothing else to configure. Away you go. Set up your policies. The rest is done. No windows to configure. There's no scheduling, no job management. All that kind of thing is all handled by HYCU. You give us what you need in one single policy, and away we go, and we'll back everything up for you. every workload that's on NC2 protected from day one, exactly like you would have done on-prem back in the day, or still like you're doing on premises as well. We can then push the right information to the right people. So we then we can send security alerts to the security team, infrastructure alerts to the infrastructure team, etc. And we can automate within your existing tools. You don't need any specialists needed. We don't have professional services at HYCU. We don't have, you know, big scripts and all these types of things. It's all made to be simple and easy to use. And then when we scale and grow, let's say you're using NC2 for that elastic capacity, right? You don't even need to deploy HYCU in the cloud if you don't want to. You can simply add your new NC2 cluster to your existing deployment without adding any complexity into there as well. We support one-click upgrades, zero maintenance windows, and we have the HYCU manager, which can now upgrade all of your HYCU controllers at the same time to the same version. So one click and away you go. Every version of every controller you have of HYCU upgrades at the same time to the same version. And then we give you that one view across your entire estate. And everyone knows that Nutanix does an amazing job at everything they do, but they're not the whole data estate in most organizations, right? They're going to have potentially some cloud native things, and they're going to potentially have some, well, not potentially, they're going to have some SaaS in there as well, right? HYCU gives you that visibility across that entire data estate. So from your on-prem or infrastructure for Nutanix, maybe your cloud native in Nutanix, and also maybe some cloud native that you're running on natively on public cloud, but also into your SaaS applications, Microsoft 365, the Atlassian suite, Entra ID, Okta, GitHub, GitLab, all those types of big applications where you need protection. HYCU is going to be there and protecting that across the estate as well. Now let's dive into the ransomware resilience piece. So this is what I like to call the complete ransomware resilience. So first of all, we've got the protect, right? So we've got that complete coverage. We can't give you complete ransomware resilience or cyber resilience if you can't protect all of your data. And that doesn't just mean virtual machines. That means virtual machines, volume groups, Nutanix database service, NC2 into that as well. All of those pieces there. And it's not dependent on where you're deploying NC2 as well. HYCU supports all of the NC2 versions, as we mentioned as well. And then you add into that what I think one of the biggest things that people overlook is identity management and identity protection. HYCU can seamlessly protect your Okta, your Entra, and AWS IAM configs as well. So when you're recovering inside of AWS and you're using AWS IAM to log into that, we can recover that config inside of there as well. We help you detect, so we can uncover those threats before they have impact. So we have a dual kind of methodology for this. We have anomaly detection, and we also have malware scanning based upon YARA rules. So again, we're going to give you that information inside of NC2. We're going to be able to scan those workloads that you're running in NC2, just like you would on premises, give you full scanning capabilities in there, just like you would on-prem. So nothing gets diluted, nothing gets compromised, nothing gets kind of like scaled back just because you're running in NC2. And as always, no data ever leaves your site. So with HYCU, we do the scanning completely inside of your own cluster. It never leaves the Nutanix estate. And then you've got the validation, giving you the confidence that you need whenever you need it. Simple and automated, and you can rescan any of those backups on demand with your new YARA rules or new anomaly detection piece as well to make sure it's clean and clean forever. Then we get the full testing capabilities, test that it works, test that your restores are going to work, and then the simplicity piece, backup, recover. The idea of doing backups is that we can recover, and HYCU has instant restore capabilities for Nutanix, and again that carries over into NC2 as well. So just because we're moving that to the cloud, it doesn't change that. We can still use instant recovery directly back into wherever that VM came from on premise or in NC2, exactly like you would as well. And I mentioned immutability earlier in there, but I just want to kind of highlight that again. Every backup is immutable by default. No one has to change anything. There's no settings you have to turn on. Point us to an immutable data store. We'll store the data in immutable format. And then last but not least, well, before we come on to kind of some proof points, but security that you trust, data you own, recovery you control, super important. And I think this is something that people maybe overlook in terms of like sovereignty and control, those types of things. But we have, some of the most prestigious and hardest certifications to get in the industry, things like DISASTIG, SOC 2, FIPS 140-3. All of those things have been validated. And, we have government agencies running HYCU inside of their environments. And if they've certified it for them, it's going to be good enough to be passed by your board as well. And that security is built in. So everything we do at HYCU, we have that security layer built in, rather than being an add-on or a bolt-on or something you need to configure or pay for. It's kind of built into the way we do things. So from a small attack surface to the malware scanning to all of those things, that's all built into the framework of HYCU, rather than being just a bolt-on appliance or a bolt-on extra. And then your data goes where you decide. So there's no moving it into a vendor cloud, moving it into a HYCU cloud. We don't own storage. We don't store data. It's always down to the customer to provide their own storage. Whether that's, on Nutanix block storage, on Nutanix objects, in S3, in Azure or GCP cloud storage, OVH object storage, wherever that may be, you can store all of that data wherever you want it and having complete control of that. And it can change at any point in time. So if you have workloads that are running on-prem, you can use Nutanix objects or data domain or something like that on-prem. And if you have NC2, you don't have to store it in the same place, right? You can store that in S3 or in cloud storage, whatever you want to use that, giving the flexibility to decide where your data goes. And then a couple of things here. So the couple of kind of use cases. So TT Electronics, a global manufacturer across 27 different sites. Over 500 servers backed up across those 27 sites. They managed to immediately cut their backup time in half, and it's fully deployed, and all engineers were fully trained on HYCU in less than 1 month. That is the simplicity, and that's the kind of the proof point in the simplicity of HYCU when you pair it with Nutanix. And again, Callaway Golf, we can help them with backup. Shame they can't help with my golf game. It's absolutely terrible. But they were 95% deployed across all their locations within months. They actually eliminated the need for the dedicated backup management teams. So when I say, simplicity really kind of comes through with HYCU, this is again the proof point for that. They've got a single pane of glass for their global backup visibility, and they significantly reduced their TCO alongside that as well. And again, they gave us a nice quote here. HYCU gave us the ability to recover much quicker. There were literally immediate results, right? So hopefully you found it interesting. I think I've gone, 2 or 3 minutes over, so I apologize that for going over a little bit. But a few QR codes on the screen here, and we're going to throw up a poll. So if you do want us to contact you, if you want like a demo or a trial or anything else like that, hit the poll that comes up, and scan the QR codes on the screen you can see now. The first one being a data sheet there, the free trial in the middle, and then our live action demos as well. So product tours on the left-hand side of the screen there. So I'll leave those up for a few minutes, but I say thank you. I can't see any questions in the chat, so I'll just leave these for a couple more seconds. But I thank everyone for your time, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.